And here's some big fish. Some of my biggest fish have been caught through the ice. You know, if you think about it, you got eggs in them, things like that. I did release those fish, but it's the time of year where I love it. There's not a lot going on. Normally we should be ice fishing, hopefully by now. Obviously we had a rainstorm today. But really when it comes down to it, it's ice safety. And I know there's guys in here, there's actually even a nice guy sitting back here with you guys. But the reality is I see it with my buddies even all the time, guys that do it, and they're considered to be some of the best that there is at it. And the reality is things like ice picks. We all know, here they are. I mean, they're $5. They are what they are, but even my buddies that I see them in the bottom of their bucket, the reality is it doesn't do any good. Just like when we bury our life jackets, we all fish, guys fish 200 days a year, but if you don't have these things accessible and stuff hits the fan, it's a bad deal. And again, you know, ice fishing with guys, and I do these little talks, and they're like, man, this is like Ross, he's an ice fishing guy, and we're going to talk about like ice safety. And really, it's the first thing we should be talking about, because it's the first thing. Like boats, not that you can't get yourself into trouble, right? We've had incidents out there, quite a few in this last year in Lake Erie even, but the reality is ice fishing, it gets really, really, really complicated, and everything it's just exponentially worse. So some of the stuff like a spud bar, you know, there's a lot of different types of spud bars. I'm using one that's almost identical to this. I got a two-piece one that's kind of nice. But the big thing is even in your setup, like I do most of my stuff in like July and August, my ice fishing stuff, because that's for me kind of my slowest time when I'm trying to get things ready. And believe it or not, that's when I have to order my ice fishing gear for the companies that I work with. And I've built stuff on my machines where I can get my spud bar in and out easily. Because back even in my early days, you know, I had a spud bar, I felt good about it, but it was such a pain in the ass to get it in and out. You know, or you got that one buddy that's always doing it. It's kind of, again, like burying your tools in your boat when you just need a simple screwdriver. So I've got tons of tools in my boat, but I've got things that are right underneath my dash because I know that I'm gonna need access to them, and I don't want them to go, no big deal. Life jackets, whatever it may be. I mean, spud bars, I don't know how many times I use this, but checking holes, I mean, how many times I would have got myself and I just went, whoosh. We all know it, but I think we all really need a refresher on it because I kind of have to remind myself, and it's what I do for a living. So a lot of different things out there in those. The two-piecers are kind of nice because you can stash them away and make them a little more accessible and just put a pin in. And also you just don't need as much space, obviously, to do that. So another one of the big ones you can see on my sled there, that rope bag. I use these in my boat too. Hook my throw cushion to it, makes me legal. But also I have had to use them for people. Thankfully not my people, but it's amazing at that. It's a $20 item. Most people don't have them in their boat. I've got them clipped to just about everything that I own. I've used them for other stuff. I've used them to pull people out. We've used them to pull all kinds of stuff out. You know, float suits. Almost crazy not to have one. And kind of a couple of my guide clients this year that end up purchasing them, they're kind of like, I just don't ice fish that much. And I said, okay, so it's $300. I said, what's your life worth? What's your insurance? But the reality is I would encourage you probably to get a float suit just to use in the boat. Like I wear mine early and late because the reality is with a lot of people I fish with, if I went over, it'd be a bad deal. Life jacket or not, it's just like these are self-draining suits and they work really, really good in the boat. And guess what? They're also keep you pretty darn warm. So it's really no excuse anymore. There used to be one or two float suit companies, regardless of what you like. If you're a tall guy, one of my buddies in college is 6'9", played in the NBA, and they've got an ice suit that fits him now. So there's really no excuse. You know, some of those survival suits, the Mustangs, you know, they're really nice. But the reality is they're no good if you don't have them all buckled up. So then, you know, you might as well have one that's a little more comfortable that you're actually going to have. And again, it's not going to, we're not in deadliest catch type situations. It's going to get you and keep you upright. Because we've had a bunch of incidents out there without naming things that I think all of us know and have seen.
Which one do you recommend?
You know, and again, the one that everybody always just questions me on, even on my boat, because I've got a bunch of big screen drafts. I got 12-inch hummingbirds hanging all over my boat. It looks like TV sets. And guys go, why do you have a compass on your dash? And the reality is I've got one in my pocket of my jacket too. I just never take it out. And I can tell you back in college, I can remember fishing off Put in Bay with one of my roommates who had a home there. And we were literally, you could see the homes. And we came out of the shack and it was like, oh boy, couldn't see anything. Now back there, those guys, it's pretty rough deal. You know, there's no GPSs or anything hanging on machines. And even like 2 years ago, same thing. I had a buddy who took his wife out trying to help her catch some fish. And I literally went and grabbed my graph. This was kind of a nice thing. Carried the hummingbird, it's got a GPS in it. And we literally got it out because we were with their equipment. And I took that out, and I literally had to look at this woman. She's a surgeon, but she was pretty smart woman, but she's like, no, we're not going in a circle. And we were going in a circle. And you know, out there, even though they've got ice where a lot of times we don't have ice, it doesn't matter. You can use this scenario anywhere that you want to put it. The reality is they start going in a circle. We've seen those movies where the guys find their tracks 3 days later. And I can tell you a million. Just this year, there's Big Dave in the back there was with me. We came out of the shanties towards the end of my guiding deal. And again, I've got a 10-inch or 12-inch graph on my Argo. I got another one. And half the time I don't even turn them on because I can see where I'm going. I got my machines out there. We came out and Dave, I mean, I got a video of that. I mean, to say a whiteout is an understatement. You couldn't see 50 feet in front of you. You probably couldn't even see 20 feet in front of you. The nice thing was I popped the graphs on and we were good to go. But the reality is, just like I had some questions here as we were kind of getting set up and people were asking about shut-off systems on machines and things like that, drawdowns. I've had all of these things go bad. We all have. You know, you've had things start popping fuses, something happens, mice eats, whatever it may be. But a $5 compass is something that I can tell you is one of those deals. If you listen to anything that I got to say today, it's not about what color lure or this or that. Is have that with you, because I've had to use it twice. And I mean, it's literally, when I say a lifesaver, I truly mean that, because at least you know what direction you're going to go. Or at least you know to halt, or you can give some, some basic directions. And again, it doesn't cost anything. I keep them in my jacket. They're just there. Hopefully you never have to use them. I'm redundant myself with, basically in theory, I have at all times 3 GPSs on me. One remote there with my flasher, if not a second one even at times. And then I've got 2 machines, or 2 graphs on any machine that I carry. So creepers are another really big one. I had to probably, I want to say it was 2003, that year we had really, really good ice. I mean, just full disclosure, again, I don't mean to scare you, but like the safety thing really is kind of a big deal. I've pulled 3 people out, one of which almost didn't make it even after I got them out. That was maybe 14 or 15, because after we had that 13-14 year, we had a lot of people that next year wanted to go ice fishing, and there was a whole lot of rookies out there, and it showed. And we pulled a guy out, and I like saw death on his face. We got him in. It was a serious, serious deal. And the long and the short of it is something as simple as back in 2003, where there was a crack that opened up. And again, 15 years ago, I'm not an old guy. So 15 years ago, I was much less experienced. We don't get ice every year, even though I do get to travel all over with the ice team doing things. 15 years ago, I had a lot less days on the ice. And I had to cross over, and there was a guy who was handicapped who was stuck out there. And I went back to help him. And just because I had creepers, I literally was able to do what I needed to do, where the guys that didn't have creepers, they were literally spinning their wheels. So something as simple, again, as creepers, like these are, I've actually just pulled these off the shelf here, these yak tracks. These are kind of nice. They're not like the best if that's what you're going to do 24/7, but the thing I like about them is you don't tear your stuff up. A lot of us don't put the creepers on because we're going to tear our seats up, or machines, or cars, or whatever it may be. So these are really nice. I actually use them. I started using them just to do the driveway. But some type of creepers, or having another pair. I've got Catulas. If I'm going to walk, I know that's what I'm going to do. I use the Catulas. That's, in my opinion, the best one out there, at least the best one that I've used. But having creepers, even if you don't use them, those are the things that are kind of in the bottom of the bucket. But when you need them, I promise you, it's a really, really big deal. I'm gonna put a permanent mount on my bigger machines with a VFH radio. Right now I've got handhelds. That's another thing to think about. If you guys are out there, believe it or not, cell phones don't work out there all the time. Anybody has really crappy cell phone service now? They're doing that whole switch around, so we've got pretty much no service. And where I used to have perfect service, I don't. So even between the guys that work for me with ice guiding, we'll just communicate on the VHFs. Probably shouldn't have said that out loud, because now y'all are going to be scanning me, right? But the reality is, again, that's another simple tool. We've all probably got one. If you don't, they're very inexpensive, and it makes a big, big difference. And the last one would be a jump box. Again, these are all things we know, but I've got a really, really nice, I think it's NOCO's the brand, no affiliation with them or anything like that, but you can jumpstart a diesel truck with the one I have. So, but the reality is, as I wouldn't try to jumpstart a diesel truck with that, you can probably just get your car started. It's kind of like sleeping bags and tents. You kind of see these things and you're like, 4 to 6 people, are you nuts? Same thing with these deals. Whatever they tell you they're going to do, you probably get about half out of it in real life conditions. So that's why I've got the biggest one I can get. And another thing that I've kind of noticed, because I probably own 6 of them that I bought and got one in this machine, got one in this machine. The reality is a couple of them will have the voltage on them, which is super, I found to be a big deal, because then you immediately know, like, is this dead? Is this just like a surface deal? So you kind of almost can diagnose the problem before you get it. Because if you get something that's that bad, a jump box isn't going to do it. There's the reality of it. So again, most of us don't carry a multimeter. I carry one in my boat now. but most of us aren't going to have a multimeter on the ice. I mean, at some point, this stuff does weigh. I mean, you can't carry, but right? So having that built in is a super, super nice thing that I know I really appreciate. And we kind of talked about, you know, a little bit of this here with the GPS deal, because I mean, that's my Argo, or my main Argo. It's a 7-inch Helix Hummingbird and a 12-inch. While that may be overkill a little bit, it's really not, because these are units that I use regular time. Like, this is off my boat. You know what I mean? This is not like this is going to cost extra money. You can get a power cable and a bracket for probably about $50, and all of a sudden you've got that same thing. I see some of these guys out there and they've got all this money invested, and aside from just safety, they're looking at like a watch. You know, same thing when we're on our boats. Everybody in a boat fishing here? Half of you guys? A lot of head nods. The reality is, you get out there, you've got this nice big fancy boat, and you got a GPS that's this big. And it looks, when you're standing on the fin feather or wherever you're at, it looks really nice and clear. But as you start bouncing around, even with young eyes, you get rain coming, whatever it may be, you can't see jack. And then you start zooming in, zooming out, you can't see anything. But you know, just like this day when we avoided the whiteouts, and having the mapping, that's got to be the biggest game changer from when I first started on Erie, for sure. So the location stuff, staying away from the traffic is going to be a huge, huge deal. Now, when you're on these flats, the reality is, especially now, because on Lake Erie we're very spoiled. I fished a lot of other places. I promise you, we are very, very, very spoiled. A bad day here is a good day a lot of other places. So when you start fishing a lot of these flats, because that's realistically, like on Erie, we'll just break that down because the majority of you, I think, that's what we're talking about, is we're fishing kind of pre-spawn areas, essentially. We've got some transition stuff where you've got, like around the Bass Islands, for example, we've got troughs. You know, they're basically like a feeding deal. You know, they bring food, they bring current through there. So those fish kind of hang out there, kind of like any of you guys deer hunters. You know, they're funnel areas. But the reality is, the bulk of the fish are going to be on these areas that are adjacent spawning areas. So that could be, you know, outside of Huron. The reality is we don't get safe ice there, but maybe once every 20 years. But, you know, around the Kelly's Island area, and then of course around the Cans, which is where most people are fishing, on those big flats. The biggest thing would be, I think, big moves versus small moves. So I usually have one guy that works with me or for me when we're guiding and we're doing our stuff, or we're filming a show or whatever it may be. And we try to make small moves because I want to try to be in the game. You know, when you just start throwing, your course correcting is difficult if you just start driving over here, you're over here, you're over there. The reality is you get on outside of some of these packs, normally packs do break up, the reality, if people aren't catching. The problem is a lot of times they don't break up until it's too late, because we get bite windows. You know, anybody that's fished in April knows that fish bite. You can do anything between 8 and 9 one day, or making whatever time it is, 10 and 11. We talk to somebody that's fishing 20 miles away, and that's when they're catching them. So you can do anything. It's broken clock fishing, as I was told by a guy a long time ago. Everything's right twice a day. So the problem is you have to be where you need to be and doing what you need to do and the time that the fish on their clock, not on ours. So that's why I think that small moves for me, instead of just going over here, going over there, and I'll kind of grid it out. But the big thing is just not getting lazy. Probably the biggest thing that I also fight with, and I'm pretty fortunate because I have a lot of shanties. I've worked with a company that makes shanties for probably 15 years, and so I get opportunities that maybe other people don't without spending a whole lot of money. The reality is you got pop-ups and fold-over. Not that there are other types, but that's the reality of those are the two that we're looking at. And for example, on the mainland, or when I'm fishing, if I'm going to go to Simcoe or something, personally, I run a fold-over because I may be running the gun and I don't like to move my stuff twice. Now I fish off the Bass Islands because I happen to have some good connections there, and when I go out there, the reality is you're not moving a bunch. If I'm there, it's because this is, the only place we can go. Like, it's like if we're going to go in the store, you kind of put your stuff out there and you got a shanty shallow, deep, and we can't go out there because there's a boat, you know, that type of deal. But again, there's a lot of, that's just me. This is a guy that fishes for a living. So again, like we talked about, this may not apply to everybody that's here. The reality is pop-ups are a lot less expensive, and they can be stored a lot easier. I mean, you can put one of these in your car. I mean, if you don't have a truck, you're probably not going to be able to deal with fold-over. I mean, there are exceptions. You can put a hitch hauler and do different things like that. But the other thing is, working these sport shows, you get a guy comes in and it's kind of like, you know, car shopping or something. Say, hey, my budget's, you know, 10 grand, looking at some new cars. Like, really? Same thing with the sport shows, I think, with shanties, is guys are always looking to have, you know, I need 6 to 8 people. I'm like, I am going to guide that many people. You're going to take that many people out? So the pop-ups, you can put a lot more people in those realistically and fish. Maybe not ideally, but you can do it. Where the foldovers, you're going to have you're going to need a trailer and a truck and a buddy and everything else, and just a ton of weight as well. Where a pop-up that weighs roughly 50 pounds, you could realistically, and I do fish 4 to 6 people in that, where you're going to have a couple 100 pounds and have a couple people in a fold-over model. But running and gunning, I really, really like the fold-over myself because you can put everything in there. You don't have to move it twice. Here's the magic word, current. I had a guy tell me probably about 15 years ago, he said, there's no current in Lake Erie. I mean, that current is one of those things where early in my career, I was like, I hate current until I didn't have current, days out there. Because a lot of my early stuff was, again, with my buddies from high school and from college who had parents on Put in Bay Island where we always had ice. And I would go there and stay for a week, and we had this current, and we were always using 3/4 ounce pimples. That's what everybody used. If you went on that island, that's all you could find. That's all there was. The gas station there, that's what you had. That's what everybody that lived there used. And the reality is when that current backed down, fishing sucked. So rather it was the fish, positioned differently or they weren't moving, current positions fish, it turns things on. It's not a bad thing, but we have to learn to adjust to it because it's certainly not going to adjust to us. It opens cracks. I can tell you a million stories where, back in 2003, we had really, really good ice. I mean, I fished north of Kelly's in 2003 on a snowmobile. It's scary to even think about that now. Yeah, it was. In March, we still had 18 inches ice in the beginning of March. And I can remember going out and we were filming a show, and another guy came out and said, hey, so I walked like 100 yards out and said, you're not going to spook all our fish. So I drilled a hole for him, and I went, and I was through. And it was one of those where we were on that much ice. Current eats, whether it's springs, I know that there are these spring things out there. Current eats it away, but you get in these little pockets. That's why I'm anybody that's fished with me and the hard water stuff knows I'm an absolute boat Nazi or ice Nazi, because you stick with me. We're on a tether, because the reality is you don't know what's right there. I know where we just came, but I don't know what's right there. None of us do, and it changes so frequently. And a lot of people don't understand that. And again, we all have friends, and I'm probably that guy too, that says, well, I need to learn this with my own self. I hear what you're saying, but the reality is while that may catch us less fish in the open water season, during hard water, it may end your life. So, again, all those things that we talked about prior, make sure that you can get out of that situation. But the reality is don't put yourself in that situation. So pay attention to current, because it can do everything from kill your fishing to kill you. Probably one of the biggest things that I see, or that I feel that I do, that I don't see a lot of guys doing, or definitely not the masses, is setting myself up before things even start. I feel like I'm ahead of the game, or ahead of most guys, before we even put a line down. I'm not saying I'm a better fisherman, but I put myself in a better situation. And this is a 2-man shack. There's 1 seat in there, antisocial. This is my personal little shack here. And I'll drill a triangle like that. And the reason is I can tell you a million stories where I've watched stuff even this year on cameras, or we're filming a show and we get what we need. Now we just trying to get the cool stuff. And we literally, like the thermos story, a guy dropped a thermos on the ice. And we were so covered up in fish, and we're watching them on aqua views. I mean, the flash was just going nuts. Guy dropped the thermos. The fish were gone. I mean, gone. It was unbelievable. Walked out, 100 feet, drilled some holes trying to fish. I mean, just, we were covered up. These fish, they do move. I'm not going to say they don't, but I watched them on the camera. Walleye's got to be the most antisocial recluses on the planet, and they get spooked, freak show stuff. So that thermos thing, I always think about that all the time with guys and doing things. So I certainly don't want to start drilling holes once another buddy comes, or once things, again, that kind of proactive. Preparation causes separation regardless of what you're doing. And by doing the triangle hole, does anybody know why I might do that, even though it's kind of up there? I know, Dave, you got to see this firsthand last year, where we literally had the current switch. We had current running, let's say this way, because we don't have any fancy machines here to show us, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, we're going to set up for this. Well, 15, 20 minutes later, the current's going this way. I mean, literally swiping out. So all I do is I just move my shanty around. So this is for me. And now I've got 2 holes to fish, and I can put my transducer on another one. So when the current's blowing that way, I still get 2 lines, and that transducer's got a 3-4 foot head start. But I don't have to make any noise. I don't have to interrupt my fishing, because the reality is if you wait long enough when the current's doing that, just like we get the wind going out there one way, blowing the next, anybody ever seen that? if anybody doesn't wave their hand or shake their head, we both know you're lying. I mean, it's 10, 15 minutes one way, next way. It's crazy. There's a couple ladies here, so I won't say what the analogy that I use. But the reality is having that and being set up is a huge, huge deal. No different than, the whole layout internally. I don't know how many guys, as a guide that I see that lose fish in the hole. It's crazy. It drives me nuts. I don't use a pick or whatever you want to call it. I land them by hand myself. I rarely lose them once I get up there. But I'm using a 10-inch hole. I often put my transducer in a different hole. I mean, how many guys have lost one in the transducer cable? Anybody here should be raising their hand. Okay? Fortunately, I haven't probably done it. I don't want to knock on wood or whatever. It's been a long time since I've done it because I just generally don't put my transducer down that hole anymore. It's kind of like once bitten, 10 times shy for myself. But probably one of the biggest things, again, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do in any of these things, but think about this because like in a pop-up, for example, there's so many options. I mean, I know a guy who has a piece of like 3/8 plywood that he sets down and he literally uses that as like a template. That's even a little OCD for me, but it is kind of nice because his stuff, he's never guessing, and then he sets up a shack around it. He stands there, one of my island buddies, he's standing there, he holds it, and his buddy secures it, and as crazy it is, and everybody is still busting his chops to this day about it, the reality is he doesn't have problems, and everything is exactly the same, and they're the right distance out. But one of the first things you can see, here's what we got going on. Here's a third rod, basically. Here's the guy's brother, and here's the not smart brother. We won't name their names, Bob. But we had a fish on the bottom there. I'll do it again so you can see it. So what's happening right there? You see that fish coming up off the bottom? I try to tell the guys, the number one thing when I'm fishing, I try to get right with the guys because I know we catch a lot more fish because of it. So this guy was jigging. He's just monotonous, generally that's something you don't want to do out there. I don't know if it's like the hamster wheel or whatever it is, but when I got this guy later, because the guy up top here, he caught 0 fish for like 3/4 of the day. Now the guy in the bottom right after this, I was like, we're going to play Ross's game for a little bit, just give me 5 minutes. And he ended up catching like a bazillion that day. We had to get his brother to stop jigging. I'm like, put it in the bottom, pull it way up, whatever it is, because it's literally doing, I think, one of these deals where the fish is all over the place. Where that fish came up, the second mistake that was made there, again, hard to say things like that, but later on the day it proved to be true, is that fish when it came up, he stayed at that same zone. You notice he was just kind of doing one of these, kind of the hamster wheel. It didn't work for the top one, it scared those fish off. On the bottom, when you saw that fish come off, he showed himself, and then he's like, nah, I'm good. The reality is you need to bring those fish up. Even last year in 33 feet of water, I had fish that I actually hooked into 5 or 6 feet down. My biggest fish of all time through the ice, I lost them, and I did one of these in my headlamp, and I saw eyes, and the fish hit, I don't know, that far below the hole, 14 and change. I mean, crazy deal. They follow them up. They're inquisitive. Maybe they're not hungry. I don't know. I'm not here to tell you those things because I definitely do not know. But the problem with this right here is if this guy, they all want to like steal each other's fish. In this scenario, if this guy would have quit jigging, which I finally got him to do like 5 hours later, once that bottom fish gets hooked, I guarantee you that within that zone, there's more fish around. So we went from getting 0 fish for several hours there to all of a sudden we're getting doubles. Because now once that fish is up, I told him drop back down, and there's another fish generally in that vicinity. And that second one is almost, you can do anything you want, right or wrong. They just want to hit. They see the other fish hooked, what's going on? I don't know, it's like smallmouth bass fishing, it's kind of a lot like that. So, I mean, you just flat out, you get them. So tell your buddy to stop jigging. That's the long and the short. Or bring it up or bring it down. But if you're in that same window deal, you're just competing for the same fish, and the reality is you're both going to lose. Rods. I'm a little biased because I designed this thing, but I did build about 6 of them to get exactly what I wanted. I do use some other rods and some bigger ones, but the reality is, this is my signature series rod for clam on the Ice Pro series. And like that right there, the big thing is I want a little bend, but I don't want too much. Because probably the biggest thing, no different than when you're jigging, is tip bounce is a bad deal. And when we're talking the reality of using 1/2 ounce lures on the regular, that 1/2 ounce lure, if we put it on a postal scale or if somebody's using a scale for something else, is you put some minnows on there and now that thing's pushing 1 ounce, 3/4 of an ounce or whatever it is. And we got the same rod. And when you start jigging like this, I know it's kind of hard to see, when you start doing this, I want that no different than my jigging rod in open water. I want that to be back to zero like that, because I don't want to, I want to move the bait basically in place. You know, plastics, soft plastics, I think that's why they're so successful, is you can just get that incremental movement without moving it in the water column. It's too many times when those fish, you know, yes, you can get them to bite that broken clock thing when you're moving it up and down immediately, but it's just barely moving it within the column and having some type of action imparted. The line, you know, I've got monofilament on there. Number one question I always get asked is, what is this? It's Japanese monofilament, so you can't get this, but I want it strictly, it handles really good. It's technically really a copolymer because of the coating that's on it, but I like that mint colored line. Now, Stren does have something similar that you could get to have that same type thing, but again, we kind of touched on this. If I'm going to use mono, if I can get away with it. I've got nerve damage in my hands, and I can't feel like I used to be able to feel, and I know a lot of guys that just don't have the feel compared to like my buddy Shorty that works for me. Like he can, I'm telling you, this guy is unbelievable. He can feel a strike, you know, before you can even see it. But the reality is, mono is going to land you more fish. Braid is probably going to get you a few more bites. So I do use braid at times, especially when I'm doing things where I'm not moving the lure much. Because again, I can get away with things on feel, just like when you're jerkbait fishing or you're fishing a crankbait or something like that. When you're moving that and you've got line being moved, you can feel that pressure. I mean, how many people fish a crankbait for like bass or something in here? I won't be mad at you. Okay. I like it too. But how many times you caught a big old smallmouth and at the beginning it was just like mush. That's all it was. And you're cranking, you're moving 30 inches of line every time you turn the handle. The reality is think about that if we were still fishing and that fish hit the same way on a bait like a drop shot or a tube that was just barely moving. You're not going to feel it. I mean, Tom Keenan, one of the walleye guys, when I wrote a book, I asked him everybody for a tip, and his tip was just land the fish that you get or hook into the fish that you already have that bit. And it's one of those things you kind of hear and it sounds like a stupid tip, but it really is the best one going. Now how you do that's a different story, but those little things like that, like with having the proper line. So again, I carry one rod with me out of my 3 or 4 that I carry that has braid on it, and a lot of times, especially when the current's racing and I've got more line out or I'm angled, where I don't have to move that as much and I can feel those subtle little hits. We talked about the rod. We got my mono. This is one of those hard things that I would tell you I would highly, highly suggest you do. I don't care what you use for it, but you've got a little swivel in there. This one happens to be a Spro Power swivel. You don't need any fancy things. You don't need any really big ones. I mean, these things are literally cost pennies. I've had some of them that I found in the bilge of my boat for, you know, a whole year, and they come up and they're, I told you, they don't clean real good. And the reality is they're just as good and they're very inexpensive. You don't have to have a sample ball bearing. Actually, I would think you don't want to, because if you get this terminal tackle pretty good size, when we look at that sonar there and you see that, you're going to see that on there. And all of a sudden you're going to think you got a fish, you got a bait fish, and the problem is something, believe it or not, because these sonar things are not perfect, they're hitting a return. Again, little things that make a big difference. A lot of my biggest fish that are on the outside of that cone, you could misinterpret that for your swivel. I've had it happen. I mean, there's no way to know what a difference in a return is. On leaders, I usually go a hair longer just because that way if I cut down, I don't have to, you know what I mean, re-put a whole new deal on. I can just retie, because the reality is you tend to get a little bit of chewed up stuff right in here. So I'll cut a few inches off and still be good. But you get too much longer, the problem is this thing starts getting up in here, and while I have no inserts on my rod on purpose, now when you start getting this swivel up here and it's in and out with drag and fighting the fish, you're going to start chewing stuff up, you're going to start working on your knots and things like that. This is Sunline leader material, 16 pound. That's about the biggest snap. I know none of you can see this, but we can look at it later. This is a #1 dual lock. Don't go any bigger than that. I mean, actually, ideally, I just grabbed this to put this together for today. If I'm fishing, they're still called #1s, but they're different brands or different sizing, just like hooks, and it's going to be smaller than that. And that's kind of my setup, high-vis line, whether it's braid or whatever it may be, and using the smallest that I can get away with. Lure categories, there's a big old fatty walleye. That one was caught on a trolling spoon, believe it or not. It's a Silver Streak Junior trolling spoon. Kicking it out, we'll talk about it in a second, but here are kind of the big categories. But getting into the categories instead of the type of lure, and what I mean by that is, let's say brand A or brand B or brand C. Forget what actual lure you're using. What type of lure is it? Is it a blade bait? Is it a flutter spoon? You know, we catch them on a slab spoon or a rattle spoon like this. I mean, there's several rattle spoons out there. And while this one is different because of the way that it flutters, and I have the most success on this truthfully, you can catch them on a buckshot on days that they're biting on this. Maybe not as good, but you're going to. And so again, kind of that course correcting thing where we're just getting closer in what we're doing. And we go all the way down. We've got jigging wraps, we've got flutter spoons, we've got curved spoons like a Cleo, a pimple, and believe it or not, a lure that I don't even like telling guys, but I guess like the guy told me the other day, he's like, man, you're kind of in the education game. You ain't fishing tournaments no more. Spill the beans. A plain lead head jig I've caught an absolute bazillion giants on Lake Erie. A bazillion. Like, I don't even like telling y'all, to be honest with you, especially since I see a few people in here at competition, you know what I mean? But the reality is you're going to catch a lot of fish on those as a follow-up. You go to Saginaw Bay. We talked about a few guys here before this thing got started. On Saginaw Bay, that is the real deal. A lot of guys even they're using such a small jig that they just to have that feel, they're actually using a slip bobber on top of it. Even though we're only in 6-8 foot of water, but you just barely see that thing move. And I don't care who you are, even if you got better hands than I do or visibility, you would be amazed at the subtleties on what those fish. I mean, pan fishing. Anybody ever seen the bluegills? I mean, you're watching them down the hole and he blows your lure in and out and you're watching it, you don't feel it, and you only got this much line out. The reality is these fish are pretty amazing at what they can get away with. The starting lineup for me, because again with ice fishing, it's kind of like tournament fishing or whatever. You know, you've got your stuff tied on, or as a guide, you know, you've got your things that are ready, and not that you can't switch over to something if need be, but you got that stuff that's ready to rock out right now. And again, with ice fishing, it's like that. We talk about those little windows. Early in the morning, late in the afternoon, most places, that's when your better bite's gonna be. Now in Erie, we're pretty lucky because you can sleep in a little bit. There's a lot of times the middle of the day happens to be as good or maybe even better. But the reality is, it doesn't matter what that is you've got that window, and if you're looking for your lure, you're trying to get something tied on, and you've got a 20-minute window, half an hour window, sometimes even less than that, you better be ready. So I try to have these things kind of put together. A rattle streak is absolutely my favorite one. A jigging wrap, when they're on that, there is nothing better. I don't know, you know, especially when the bite gets pretty tough. Early at the Bass Islands, for example, it's an amazing, amazing lure. If you don't have it, you're in deep duty that day. A Swedish pimple, positively hate the things, but I got news for you. It is an absolute killer, especially if you don't fish a lot. Like when I'm guiding, somebody says I haven't fished before, and I've got the guy that's going to do the hamster wheel deal, I'm probably going to give him a pimple because the reality is you're going to catch fish on it. And then the ball head jig. That's the one that I've always got. It's basically like a dead stick for me. I hand pour my own, basically to get a bigger hook, you know, so 16th. I do have smaller stuff that I'll use other places, like 32nd and things like that. But the reality is I want at least a 1/0 hook. Now, I haven't had much time to use them, to be all honest with you, but the new Clam, they have an open water series. They have a tungsten head with a big hook on it. It's basically meant for bass fishing. That's the real deal. Like, I'm not going to pour stuff anymore. I mean, you've got glow heads, you've got a really good black nickel hook, and you've got way oversized hooks, so it ain't worth the hassle. But in the past, you know, I was tooling out molds and getting all this stuff. Just a dozen jigs will last you a lifetime. You know, I'm still using stuff from years upon years ago. So that's my starting lineup. But again, I kind of touched on this earlier, talking about last season fishing there, the color versus the weight. Truthfully, weight matters more. Anybody ever fished the Detroit River or any river situation where you're vertical jigging? I'm not going to say that color don't matter, but the reality is if you got the wrong size jig head on, you're in way worse shape than you are if you got the wrong color. I'd rather have the wrong color and the right weight, and that's the thing that people do the backside. Almost, it's a joke amongst me and my friends when I do these things. At the end of it, everybody comes up and says, hey, I'm going to buy a few of them rattle streaks. What's the couple colors I should buy? I'm only going to buy 1 or 2. And I get the same thing with bandits. Hey, they got 100 colors. Hey, refunders, they got 100 colors. And I'm like, where are you at? Where are you fishing? What are you doing? You know? But yeah, chrome blue if you had to pick one, right? Probably the biggest thing is the tipping. Anybody that, I don't care what type of fishing you're talking about, you can tip things like a flutter spoon, for example, and you put a big giant minnow on there, you pretty much killed it, right? I mean, again, you can pick a million things. How many guys you trolling crankbaits at some point in here? Give me a real raise hands. Work with me. Most of you. How many times have you reeled them in and there's a tiny piece of weed on there that you're like just that big, and the bait's doing like a sack of potatoes? You killed it, right? It doesn't take much to throw things out of whack that are designed to do a certain thing. And the same thing is with these lures. You have to be really careful on how you rig them up. Last thing, and then we'll take some questions, but to stinger or to not stinger? Anybody ever caught fish, let's say even on a hair jig with a stinger? Right. I mean, and maybe one day you catch 3/4 of your fish actually on the stinger, right? And then how many times the next day you aren't catching them real good and take the stinger off? Now maybe you haven't done this. No? Again, I get a good sample. I'm not to tell you like I know everything, but when I got 3 or 4 guys that are my test samples every day, right, and I'm watching them, that's what, I know I probably shouldn't say that out loud, but when you've got a guy, like I had some guys from Nebraska last year, none of them had ever jigged in their life. Like, you're from Nebraska, shouldn't you like eat corn and jig? And they didn't think that was funny either. But the reality is, I'm watching these guys that don't know no different. And the one guy says to me, "Can I take the stinger hook off?" Well, I took it off the one guy's because he was just hanging up on bottom and he was barely moving. So again, we learn things by just incidental, I think, if you're paying attention to what's telling. Well, all of a sudden this guy who don't know nothing about jigging is out fishing these other 3 guys like 5 to 1. Again, they're 5 feet apart. We're drifting on a giant flat, 200 yards apart, you know, whatever it is. So I take them stinger hooks off the other guys, and all of a sudden now they're catching. And that's probably not as prevalent, and maybe that's why it doesn't hit home with you guys as much when we're talking about open water jig fishing with a hair jig. But I can tell you that like using a stinger hook, for example, on a jigging route will either light your day up or shut it down. Again, not here to tell you a million scenarios. That could be an hour talk within itself. But I don't know how many guys have lost a lot of fish in a jigging route. If you all don't raise your hand, you are liars, liars, liars. I mean, at times, you know, I'll put a bigger hook on, right? Cut the thing right off. I'm putting a bigger size hook on. A lot of times that isn't. I've watched them when they come up and they just headbutt it. You put that stinger on and you got that hook minnow down there. Maybe you're hooking it into it. 100 different ways again that you can do that. But the reality is, there's days where that's how I'm getting bit. And then there's days where I do that because I start getting short bit, and now I'm getting no bites or the fish are going bye-bye. We'd love to have you ice fishing. That's what I do. I fish every day that we can legally. We won't take you out when it's nasty, nasty, but all my information, Big Water Fishing, just about all the different social media stuff. We'll be around in the store here. Any questions or anything you want, grab me. We'd love to talk about fishing. So thanks for coming.